Okay, so you might be in the market for a new smartphone, and being the patient and prudent shopper that you are, you waited all year for Apple to finally drop their iPhone 14 lineup, and the good news is there's a lot of good options to choose from. Apple dropped some pretty big surprises on us this year that makes the new iPhones really compelling, and I have a feeling that the new 14s are going to be quite popular. Now this all sounds like good news, and most of it is, but there is one phone out of the 4 iPhones that were launched a couple weeks ago that really stands out in deviation from the rest, and that's the iPhone 14. Now traditionally, the regular non-Pro flagship iPhones have been the most popular in terms of sales, which makes sense as they're a bit more affordable while still offering a ton of the core features that go into the iPhone, and even though a lot of that sentiment still holds true for the iPhone 14, it's without a doubt the dumbest iPhone to go with this year. So the reason why the iPhone 14 is the worst iPhone to go with period is because it's near identical to the iPhone 13. Now you might be thinking, come on, that's usually how it always looks with the iPhone, but there's always something that differentiates it from last year's predecessor, right? No, not this time. And let's start by looking at the physical design, which, to be fair, was kind of expected not to see much changes. The iPhone 14 still retains the clean industrial form factor that Apple rolled out with the iPhone 12, so it still has that glass-on-glass build with the brushed aluminum frame that's nicely color matched. You get that completely flat edge that gives it that signature modern iPhone look, and no doubt, it's still a beautifully put together device. As familiar as this form factor is, it's still one that I really enjoy, especially in this size variant. It's a really well thought out phone when it comes to dimensions, as it's super comfortable to hold and operate in one hand while still giving you a very reasonable 6.1-inch edge-to-edge display to make consuming content really enjoyable. It's still made with the premium high-end build material like the ceramic shield flanking both the front and back, and has a respectable IP68 dust and water resistance rating. Now none of this is really new, of course, because when you compare the iPhone 14's physical design to last year's 13, it's pretty much the exact same thing. All the build materials are the same, the dust and water resistance rating, the size of the display, the feel in the hand, everything. Now when you whip out a spec sheet, technically the iPhone 14 is just a tad thicker and a bit lighter than its predecessor, but it's virtually impossible to notice, and the only real way to make it known that you're holding an iPhone 14 as opposed to the 13 is by going with one of the new colors. I went with this purple, which looks okay. I wish it was a bit more saturated, but it's still a nice looking phone. But at the end of the day, if you're excited to see what new design changes the iPhone 14 would bring to the table, unfortunately there really isn't any. Now again, that's kind of to be expected. Apple really only updates the physical design of the iPhone once every 5 years or so, if we're lucky, so there has to be a lot of meaningful upgrades to the inside of the iPhone 14, right? No. And to prove that, let's start with some of the bigger pieces of hardware. The 6.1-inch display is exactly the same as the one this last year, which, to be fair, still performs great. It's a Super Retina XDR OLED panel that comes in at the same 2532 by 1170 resolution. The screen to body ratio hasn't changed with the same notch cutout as the iPhone 13, and it still clocks in at 60 Hz, which I know a lot of people are going to criticize, as this is becoming a pretty dated refresh rate at this point. And importantly, the iPhone 14 doesn't have any of the new display features like the always-on display or the dynamic island that the 14 Pro has, which really is disappointing. When it comes to battery life, again, everything is the same as last year, which is kind of good because the iPhone 13 has performed really well, but there's no noticeable gains to be made on the newer model. And probably the most precedent-breaking thing about the iPhone 14 is what processor it's using. Traditionally, Apple has always equipped all of their flagship phones with their newest mobile silicon, but the iPhone 14 is using last year's A15 Bionic chip. Now yes, it does have some minor improvements in the GPU for some supposed better graphics performance, but you'd be hard-pressed to notice a difference, so even from a general performance and longevity perspective, there's really no improvements here. Now I want to make sure that I'm not giving off a message that makes it sound like the iPhone 14 has bad performance. That's definitely not the case, as the A15 Bionic is still an absolute powerhouse of a processor, but this was an area in which Apple for so long focused on differentiation, so it's kind of jarring that the iPhone 14 is lacking the new A16 Bionic chip. So okay, there's no differences with the physical design, no real differences with the internal components or performance. There's got to be some changes with the cameras, right? No. Not to sound like a broken record here, but the camera components in the iPhone 14 are pretty much the same as what's on the iPhone 13. You still get dual cameras on the rear that clock in at 12 megapixels and a 12 megapixel selfie camera on the front. Now to be fair, you do get the addition of Apple's new photonic engine that could take advantage of the new computational photography features. Does this all translate to better pictures? Maybe, but the differences are going to be hard to tell at surface level, and so far I don't see anything here that would put the 14 ahead of what we've already seen come out of previous iPhones. It's the same deal with video. You can take advantage of the new action mode stabilization, which is pretty cool, but honestly, how often are you going to need / take advantage of that feature? I don't know. And all of this is pretty familiar when it comes comes to quality. Now again, I want to be careful that I'm not giving off a message that any of this is bad in terms of quality. You're still getting class-leading still images and definitely the best video shooting capability on any mobile device by going with the iPhone 14. All I'm saying is that it's not much improved from last year at all. So at the end of the day, all of this comes together to suggest that the iPhone 14 may be the least upgraded iPhone of all time. I mean, it's so similar to last year's model, even by Apple standards, it's almost impossible for me to recommend to anyone, especially if you already have the iPhone 13. Now you might be saying, Jason, I'm on an old iPhone 6 or something like that, and I've been dying to upgrade and I've been waiting for the new iPhones to drop. Would the iPhone 14 make sense for me? And the answer is still no, and let me tell you why. The iPhone 14 comes with the starting price of $799 US, which is consistent with how this particular variant has been priced in the past. But what's important to know is that you can buy a brand new iPhone 13 on Apple's website right now for $699. And considering the overarching message here is that the 13 and 14 are virtually identical in every way, dude, save yourself the $100 and get the 13. Now, if all of this has been a letdown as you were really wanting something different this year, I'd suggest you save up a little bit more cash and either go with a new 14 Plus. I have a feeling this phone is going to be really popular this year as it's been a while since the non-Pro iPhone has had a larger variant. Or I would suggest going big this year and picking up the iPhone 14 Pro. Apple is being super intentional now about differentiating between the Pro and the non-Pro models, hence why the regular 14 is so vanilla this year. And there's way more features to get excited about with the 14 Pro that to me makes it worth it. But hey, that's just me and I want to know what you guys think. What do you guys think about the iPhone 14? Do you think it's a complete dud like me? Or do you think it's worth it? Curious to get your thoughts. Let me know what you guys are thinking in the comments down below. Okay, that's about it for this review. Don't forget to leave me a thumbs up if you guys found it useful. Again, I really appreciate it. Check out these other reviews if you're looking for more, and I'll see you guys in the next one.